Welcome to The Explainer. I am so incredibly excited to have you here today because we are going to do something absolutely fascinating. We're going to uncover the hidden architecture of storytelling. Have you ever noticed how the most unforgettable tales, the ones that just really stick with us from childhood all the way into adulthood, seem to follow this familiar rhythm? Well, today we're cracking the code on exactly why that is.
Okay, let's dive into this. Seriously, think about it for a second. What on earth connects a little boy named Peter, lost in a bustling modern New York hotel, a young Irish Bigfoot named Pinecone, who's being hunted by angry villagers, a royal princess completely betrayed by her own servant, and 7 little goats hiding from a really hungry wolf?
At first glance, you'd think absolutely nothing, right? But as we'll see as we go through this, despite having wildly different settings, totally different characters, and spanning different time periods, all these narratives actually share a universal blueprint. They operate on the exact same structural DNA. And they use this hidden framework to teach us profound, timeless lessons about human nature, survival, and empathy.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when we map these distinct stories out side by side. The pattern instantly emerges. Every single protagonist faces a very specific, overwhelming threat. We're talking an angry hotel chef, prejudiced townspeople with rifles, a treacherous chambermaid, or a calculating wolf. And crucially, every single one of them requires a heroic ally to survive the ordeal. That's the overarching pattern we're analyzing today, step by step.
Phase 1. The anatomy of danger. The crucial moment of separation.
Every great lesson in these stories always begins with a character losing their safety net. And what's wild is that the catalyst kicking off the danger is always incredibly relatable. It's never something totally out there. Little Peter leaves his designated bench just because he wants to look at a cool toy robot. The mother goat simply leaves her kids alone to run a totally normal errand for bread and honey. Pinecone wanders out of his safe cave because, well, he's a hungry kid looking for food. And the princess leaves the absolute safety of her mother's kingdom to grow up and get married. It's just curiosity, hunger, or the natural progression of growing up. But this single, seemingly ordinary act immediately forces our characters into a highly vulnerable state.
Which brings up this incredibly profound point from Pinecone's father. Brave is feeling it and walking anyway. Being separated from your safety net instantly demands bravery. And what this tells us is that true courage isn't the absence of fear. True courage is being terrified out of your wits, like Peter lost all alone in a massive hotel, or the goats hearing a really strange knock at the door, and actually taking action in spite of that fear.
Phase 2. The art of deception and prejudice. How villains operate. Now, what's really interesting about this is how calculating these threats are once the protagonist is totally isolated. The wolf doesn't just try to smash the heavy door down with brute force, right? He systematically dismantles their defenses. First, he eats honey to get a soft voice. Then he literally goes to a baker for fine rice flour to whitewash his dark paws. I mean, just imagine a wolf standing patiently in line at a bakery just to pull off a heist. It's crazy. The threat completely bypasses logic by manipulating the innocence and trust of the victims.
But deception isn't always a physical disguise, like flour and honey. Sometimes it is straight-up stolen identity. And that perfectly bridges the gap between a simple animal fable and a really complex classic fairy tale.
Take the false bride's treachery, for example. It goes way beyond a quick trick. She systematically strips the princess of her power and identity. First, she disrespectfully refuses to fetch water. Then, she forces the princess to literally trade her royal clothes for a maid's shabby garments. She swears the true princess to silence under the actual threat of death. And finally, she orders the talking horse, Falada, to be executed just to cover her tracks. It's a cruel, escalating progression that renders the true princess completely voiceless and powerless in a foreign land.
When we contrast these types of evils, it really helps us understand the DNA of a threat. On one side, we have the literal, calculated threats. The hungry wolf, the deceptive chambermaid, they are entirely self-serving. But on the flip side, we have a terrifying societal threat. In the story of Pinecone, the danger isn't some mastermind villain. It's an entire town hunting a gentle Bigfoot family out of pure ignorance and blind prejudice. They arm themselves with rifles basically because they assume anything that looks different must be a monster.
And the root of that societal threat is perfectly captured by the wise Uncle Davy. Men fear what they don't understand, and we are quick to judge at times. This tells us exactly why mob mentality forms, both in stories and honestly in real life. The beast they were hunting was just a frightened father trying to survive. but fear turn the everyday townspeople into the actual monsters of the story.
Phase 3. The Unlikely Allies. Intervention when all hope is lost.
Because when our isolated, vulnerable hero is completely outmatched by these deceptions or prejudiced mobs, a savior absolutely must step in to balance the scales. And these interveners always arrive in moments of peak despair. Whether it's an ordinary woman like Mrs. Bell finding a lost, hungry Peter and advocating for him, or Baloo the bear literally agreeing to tie himself inside a sack just to ambush a wolf near a boiling pot, Uncle Davy bravely standing his ground between armed townspeople and a hunted Bigfoot family, and the old king secretly eavesdropping on an iron stove to uncover the royal treason. They prove that help often comes from the absolute most unexpected places when things seem the darkest.
So the crucial point is this. True allies step in when the protagonist is most powerless and they demand nothing in return. They don't do it for a reward. Baloo doesn't ask for payment to fight the wolf. Mrs. Bell just buys Peter some cookies and holds his hand because he's a scared 8-year-old kid. It's an act of absolute selflessness that turns the entire tide of the narrative.
And how do these allies know to help? As Uncle Davy pleads with the angry mob, do not judge them by their appearance, judge them by their hearts. An ally's true superpower in any story is empathy. It's the ability to look right past surface-level assumptions, whether that's a kid making foolish mistakes in a hotel lobby or a giant, intimidating creature of the woods, and see a heart that is good and just needs protecting.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Phase 4, the triumph of truth, the inevitable restoration of justice.
This is it, the climax of our thematic structure, the moment we've all been waiting for. Let's walk through this timeline of justice using the Goose Girl as our prime example. First, the silenced princess, who is forbidden to speak to any human, cleverly pours her sorrows into a cold iron stove. Second, the king secretly overhears this hidden confession. And third, and I love this, it's so brilliantly poetic, when the king later asks the false bride to name a punishment for an unnamed traitor, she arrogantly dictates her own brutal demise. You see, justice in these moral tales isn't just about punishment, it's poetic. The villain's own cruel nature is exactly what inadvertently seals their fate.
The overarching message connecting all of this is crystal clear. Truth reveals itself. Whether it is whispered quietly into an iron stove by a lonely princess or roaring explosively out of a burlap sack to ambush a terrifying wolf, you just cannot contain the truth forever. Eventually, the deceptions are unmasked, the disguises completely fall away, the prejudiced mobs finally see reason, and the innocent are vindicated.
Phase 5. The Universal Moral Takeaway. What we learn from the journey.
Let's pull all 4 of these wild, distinct narratives into a unified set of core lessons that we can actually use. First, bravery is an action, not an absence of fear. You can be terrified and still do the right thing. Second, deception, no matter how calculated or well-disguised it is always eventually uncovered. Third, compassion and teamwork will absolutely always conquer prejudice and brute force. And finally, even on your absolute worst day, when you feel completely lost in a city, hunted, or betrayed, you are never truly alone. Allies exist. These aren't just fairy tale rules, you guys. They are literal frameworks for our own real-world emotional intelligence.
I absolutely love this grounded quote from Peter's mother, Emma, after they are finally reunited in the hotel lobby. She says, "So we all learned something, a big lesson." And that hits the nail on the head. Whether you're navigating an ancient magical kingdom, hiding from a wolf in a dark forest, or you're just a lost kid trying to find your parents in a busy New York hotel, the ultimate goal of the story is growth. The hardship has a purpose. We go through the trial to learn the lesson.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. Next time you encounter a story, whether it's on a screen, in a book, or honestly, a challenge happening right now in your own life, will you spot the hidden DNA guiding the hero home? Keep your eyes peeled for the separation, the deception, the unlikely ally, and the inevitable triumph of truth. Once you see the structure, you really can't unsee it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking out the structure in the world around you, and I will catch you on the next one.